Could you do us a favor? Take care of Cuba. I'll take care of it, okay?
Why them and why now? When you see Venezuela, Iran, and now Cuba is being talked about being on the chopping block, it's really the same thing.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China is now accelerating production of submarines to attack the United States, closer to home.
It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone in that we do the same thing.
It sounds like the Russians are helping Iran target and attack Americans now.
What a stupid question that is to be asking at this time.
Well, first off, it's not a stupid question.
Crude oil prices are now seeing the biggest weekly spike on record as Mideast tensions shut down a major energy shipping route.
I do think it's probably temporary, and it's one of those things where the long-term effects that has on our economy and population is significant.
Back in 2024, you made three big predictions. One, that Trump would win. Two, that he would start a war with Iran. And three, that the U.S. would lose that war.
I think, a number of the points that the professor brings up are worth bringing up, and I think are fair questions, but there does seem to be a bit of a bias. The other aspect that he didn't mention at all, which I think is a huge underestimation, is
Team Dog. Premium meals designed to keep your dog healthy, happy, and strong, to improve digestion, boost energy, and support a shiny coat. Non-GMO ingredients. No fillers, no gluten, no corn, no seed oils, and no soy. Just pure, high-quality ingredients to fuel your dog's best life. It was crafted by experts, made for your dog. Navy SEAL K-9 trainer and nutritionists. Team Dog Food, where no piece goes to waste.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mic Drop Solo. It's a new addition to the channel where I do a handful of reaction videos to short news or media clips that are popular. Then we finish the episode off with some Patreon questions. So if you want to submit kind of a Q&A style question format where I answer it in these solo episodes, just join the Patreon channel and submit your question, and I'll answer it for you. So the goal is to be able to bring you guys super current events kind of in real time as they're happening. A lot of times I end up interviewing people, and sometimes depending on who it is and what's going on, sometimes it may sit for weeks or even a couple of months before it's released. I wanted to be able to interact with you guys in a manner that's more current. So here we go. The first video is essentially Trump warning that Cuba is next. So roll the tape and we'll check it out.
We're looking forward to the great change that will soon be coming to Cuba. They're very much at the end of the line. They have no money, they have no oil, they have a bad philosophy, they have a bad regime that's been bad for a long time. And they used to get the money from Venezuela. They get the oil from Venezuela. And they want to negotiate, and they are negotiating with Marco and myself and some others. But I've been hearing so much about Cuba. But Cuba's in its last moments of life, as it was. It'll have a great new life, but it's in its last moments of life the way it is. And but our focus right now is on Iran. 4 of you said, actually, could you do us a favor? Take care of Cuba. I'll take care of it, okay?
All right, so Trump warning that Cuba is next. I've been asked about kind of Venezuela, Iran, now Cuba, anything else in terms of an agenda-wise, like why is it happening now? I think that's the most common question that you hear people ask, whether it's pundits or what have you, which is a valid question. And I think it's hard to justify or to even agree to the justification, when it's, take Iran, for example, because it's kind of the most current, is, well, they were really close to a nuke. We've been hearing that for a long time. Granted, they just said, from everything that I've read and heard, that they said that they had 11 nukes. Whether they do or not, I mean, they say a lot of things that aren't true that they're capable of or that they say they're capable of. So I would like to see, and I think it's important to show some kind of proof that that's a tangible justification. They've also kind of bounced around a little bit. Venezuela, it was, originally we're bombing narco-terrorists, and, it's a narco-terrorism thing. There are so many correlations and parallels with oil, China's influence, Iran's influence, Russia's influence in Venezuela, in Iran, ties with Cuba. To me, that they're really all tied together. And I don't think that it's a a secret or a coincidence that they're all happening in the first 2 years of the president's second term. Because the reality of it is, and again, whether you're talking Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, there are a lot of people who are celebrating that we're doing those things, which is nice to see. I know that there are a lot of people that are happy about Iran being toppled regime-wise. There's people celebrating all over the United States. There's some people who aren't, but it is, I think, largely regarded as a positive thing. My issue is with the justification, with that being kind of the reason. It's nukes. It's, everybody all over the world wants the regime change. They're huge state sponsors of terror. Those are all true. Getting rid of them are all positive reasons to make that happen. Where I take issue with it is you could find dozens of other countries all over the world where if you did that same thing, I think you'd find that same reaction. There'd be a lot of people happy about it. I mean, for that matter, if we toppled the Chinese government, which obviously is a totally different conversation, would there be a ton of people who would think that that is positive? Yeah. Same with Russia. Same with, fill in the blank. There's, a handful of countries in Africa where that's the case, and we're not doing that. So to me, to use that as a justification and saying that that's why we're willing to spend, billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and most importantly, cost American lives overseas to justify that is a tough sell, I think. Now, as it relates to Cuba, it's really the same thing. And I think going back to the point of why it's happening right now, because that's the biggest question, I think, is why them and why now? And when you see Venezuela, Iran, and now Cuba is being talked about being on the chopping block, they're all three tied to China, Russia, the petrodollar, and Trump's ability to be able to execute his priorities while he still has enough power and control within the government, i.e., the House and the Senate and the presidency, because come November, who knows if it's a strong possibility that the Republicans will lose control of the House and maybe even the Senate. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. My guess or best bet is that Trump is not willing to risk losing power and having a much harder time doing some of the things that he's doing. I could be wrong, of course. I'm curious to get your guys' take if you think that there's something else to it. But I just, when talking about Cuba is next, it's almost like there's just these dominoes that, or this list of boxes that he's checking off with, governments and countries that the United States has had issues with, and ultimately impact, Chinese relationships and Russian relationships, and they're kind of all tied together. So, is Cuba a mess, and would the world and the country of Cuba probably be better off if the United States did a similar action and had a regime change? Probably. Does that mean that it's the right call? That's a hard one to say yes to, because there's a lot of those factors that, again, it's like, why would we do it there and not some of these other places that would be equally or even more beneficial? Most importantly, I just wish that the administration and politicians across the board would be more transparent about it. To me, the gaslighting and the kind of dismissiveness and the arrogance, frankly, of saying it's for reasons that just really don't add up or make any sense is, I think, where you lose most people. I don't think most people are naive to the way that the world works and how important being able to get oil prices down and keep the cost of goods across the board low. Our economy hinges on oil and being able to transport it and being able to power everything. And, so I just wish that administrations, both current and former and hopefully future, were more transparent with the people. Whether or not Cuba is next, we will see. But I guess to reiterate, I think the biggest factor there is trying to get as much accomplished before November as possible while he has the momentum. Video 2 and 3, basically gas prices spiking after the Iran attack and the implications that has.
Crude oil prices are now seeing the biggest weekly spike on record as Mideast tensions shut down a major energy shipping route. Madeline Rivera is in Washington with the latest details. Good morning, Maddie.
Good morning, Griff. Crude oil is now $90 a barrel, the highest price in more than 2 years, and it's causing a lot of pain at the pump. The current average for a gallon of gas is $3.41, up from $2.90 a week ago, and there could be more instability in the market. Qatar's energy minister told the Financial Times Gulf energy exporters could shut down production within weeks if the war in Iran continues. Marine traffic, a vessel tracker, showed as of Friday afternoon only 8 vessels had crossed the Strait of Hormuz in the previous 24 hours, and only one of the 8 carried oil. For comparison, on a normal day, more than 100 vessels cross the strait, a crucial choke point where roughly 20% of global oil and gas transit. President Trump, though, is promising relief. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the president is considering U.S. Navy escorts for tankers traveling through the strait. The Trump administration is also rolling out an insurance program to get vessels moving again. The Development Finance Corporation will cover up to $20 billion in losses. Energy Secretary Chris Wright does not anticipate the volatility will last long.
Overnight, the U.S. Treasury unveiling a plan to bring gas prices back down as war rages in the Middle East, choking off the crucial Strait of Hormuz supply route. The new plan? Lift penalties on Russia to help boost global oil supplies, a major shift in policy. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announcing a temporary 30-day waiver that'll allow officials in India to buy Russian oil.
This is a very brief change in policy just to keep oil prices down a little bit better than we could otherwise.
All right, so with the gas price spike after what's going on in Iran, I tend to agree with the administration and secretary and most of the people who are mouthpieces for the government in that regard, in that I do think it's probably temporary. And it's one of those things where, it's painful right now, but it's kind of like eating clean, but, trying to get back in shape. Is at first it's tough, it sucks, et cetera. But in the long term, the reality is between Venezuela and Iran, if both of those countries kind of reform into a pro-Western, pro-democracy allied country with the United States, and there's, free trade or close to that, and lots of kind of back and forth in the energy sector, the long-term effects that has on our economy and population is significant. To be able to control the Straits of Hormuz or escort, tankers in and out of there, not having the regime that Iran has historically had, that can really be a thorn in the side of the energy sector globally, I do think is a huge positive. So I don't foresee gas prices being, $5 a gallon and just continuing to go up and be super expensive for very long. I think it's a temporary pain point, but sooner than later between Venezuela and Iran, I think it'll get back to where it was before and probably even lower, frankly. I do want to comment and kind of add to that, though. I wish that they were more transparent about that. I mean, seeing the flip on, Russia and India, if you feel strongly enough to, put sanctions in place to where, you're really fighting against, trade between countries and supply of oil and energy and gas, et cetera, and now you're putting waivers in, like, to me, it does seem a little short-sighted or flip-floppy or like clearly there's something more to the story if that's taking place, because for years, Russia's been the big bad guy on the block that we've been worried about, and we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars helping Ukraine fight them, and to see this, it is a little surprising and confusing and frankly frustrating. But I don't think that the gas price thing is going to be a huge problem for a long time. So what I again do wish would happen is transparency or more transparency with it. The economy is arguably the biggest issue for most people when they vote. Whether it's Venezuela, Iran, to say, hey, gas prices are high, cost of goods is high, everything is shipped using oil, gas, et cetera, by maintaining and bolstering these two enormous energy producers who historically have not been our allies. That's ultimately going to impact the U.S. economy in an enormous way. Yes, it's about nukes. Yes, it's about state sponsor of terror, but it's also about the price of everything in this country, which is tied to gas and oil. I think that level of transparency would not just help people understand why we do what we do, because the reality is, our standard of living and frankly, our way of life, is a reason why we do a lot of the things we do. One could argue it's the primary or sole reason that we do the things that we do. So I would just love to see a lot more transparency and not have jumbled messages and going back and forth with sanctions or not, or what have you, and have a more clear-cut message on why we're doing what we're doing, and I think ultimately what the end goal is. This is where we're trying to get to. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Here we are at point A, here is point B, here's what that path looks like, and this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're doing it. I don't know why that's so difficult. I just wish that our government would have a more standardized message and communicate it more clearly. But I don't think gas prices are going to be high for very long. Let me talk to you about something that doesn't get enough attention: sleep. When you're younger, you can grind on for 4 hours and power through, but in your 40s and 50s, that will catch up with you and fast. Look, a lot of us going into this year, we're finally going to fix our sleep. But it's March now. That New Year energy is worn off for most people, and if you're still waking up groggy and dragging through the day, something has got to change. Beam sent me their dream powder to try and give my honest take. This thing has become a non-negotiable in my routine. I wasn't looking to get knocked out. I didn't want to stay that heavy, drugged feeling the next morning. I just wanted real restorative sleep, and Dream delivers that. It's made with a blend of all natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. The chocolate peanut butter flavor that they sent me tastes like hot cocoa before bed, and I got to tell you, I actually look forward to it. Since I started using it, I'm sleeping all the way through the night, waking up sharp, more present with the family, and actually getting to the gym like I said I would. Beam has improved over 28 million nights of sleep across this country, and it's made right here in America. So if you've been waiting for the right time to try Dream, this is it. They're offering my listeners an exclusive discount. Go to shopbeam.com/micdrop and use the code MicDrop. It's all caps, all one word. You're going to get my exclusive offer for up to 40% off Beam's Dream Powder. This is the best discount Beam gives out, so tell your friends as well. Even if they don't listen to the show, if they want to fix their sleep, they've got to try Beam. So remember, go to shopbeam.com/micdrop and use the code MicDrop. With my code MicDrop, you can get Dream for up to 40% off. Try it today. Next video, Trump endorses the new president of Venezuela.
Since that operation, we've been working closely with the new president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, who's doing a great job. I mean, she's doing a great job because she's working with us. If she wasn't working with us, I would not say she's doing a great job. In fact, if she wasn't working with us, I'd say she's doing a very poor job. We're taking out tremendous amounts of oil. They're making more money now than they've ever made. And I'm pleased to say that this week we have formally recognized the Venezuelan government. We've actually legally recognized them.
So with Trump endorsing the new president of Venezuela, I think that's the right way to go about it. There is a fine line between endorsing or strongly endorsing, strongly suggesting, and even using negotiation tactics, to ensure that whoever is taking power is going to have a good relationship with the United States. I don't think it makes sense to force, this is our picked guy and this is who we want in there. That has bitten us in the ass time and time again. It can't be a puppet of the United States. It needs to be somebody who the people choose. But I also think, America can use leverage and should, with certain people or administrations that are willing to work with us. There's a give and take there, and I think, the U.S. needs to be careful about how they go about it. But I think it would be foolish not to try to influence it to a certain extent. And I would say that the same thing applies with whatever happens in Iran over the next, weeks and months, is kind of similarly is that if we're going to pull the trigger on, removing regimes from both of those places. What you can't let happen, and that's up for debate. I mean, there's arguments for and against. There's plenty of people who think we shouldn't have done anything in either one of those countries, and I think those are important questions to ask. Not necessarily saying I agree with it, but I do think it's important to question it. But the reality is that we've learned the hard way in Libya, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, not having enough influence to make sure that it's a smoother transition into whoever's running the country, and that we can maintain some level of an allied nature and a close-knit relationship is a huge mistake. Many times you end up getting something that's worse than what you removed. We've already again, pulled that trigger on both Venezuela and Iran. So I think it behooves us and would be foolish not to endorse and strongly support only the people who are going to do this country a favor moving forward and work with us. One of the things that seems a little contradictory in that clip is that Venezuela is already producing so much oil and they're making a ton of money. I mean, maybe I'm naive to the energy sector, but surprising that anything going on in Iran would have that big of an impact on our gas prices. If Iran's not in this hemisphere, Venezuela is, and they're supposed to be back up and running, I would think that would have a more positive impact on gas prices and would negate anything going on halfway across the world. But what do I know? So ultimately, I think it's a smart play and necessary for our administration and government to endorse and support the new president and frankly, anyone who's going to be a beneficial relationship for the United States. Video number 5 is China sending submarines to support Iran.
China says it is sending a special envoy on Middle Eastern affairs to the region to conduct mediation efforts, they claim. Beijing condemning the attacks earlier this week, now having to rely more on Russian oil due to massive supply disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that China is now accelerating production of submarines to attack the United States. Closer to home, writing, quote, China has been developing new submarine technology and a bigger, better fleet that is gaining on the United States and its allies, spurring a new undersea arms race in the Pacific. Joining me now is Gatestone Institute senior fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, that is some statement that the Navy has warned us about.
Yes. The Chinese, they don't actually need better submarines. All they need to do is stay close to their shores in what they call the bastion areas, like the Yellow Sea. But obviously, they do want subs to be able to get closer to the U.S. And by the way, we have Chinese submarines in the Arctic, which would be very, very close to Alaska and the homeland. So this is really an important development. And we have got to make sure that we have got the attack subs that can take out those ballistic missile submarines of the Chinese.
All right, so China sending submarines to support Iran, or having them closer to the United States. I think there's a bigger play here. And first, I would say, while there's some concern there, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone in that we do the same thing. And no different than our tough talk on Taiwan or doing all sorts of different exercises and patrolling in the South China Sea, all around Japan. We constantly have assets that are very close and within striking distance of China. So they're not doing anything that we haven't or wouldn't do. But the bigger play here, I think, is, and really with everything that's been going on in the last 6 months or so with Venezuela, with Iran, potentially Cuba, is really more about China, oil, the petrodollar, and our economy and kind of the long chess game of global economies. I think that's the biggest part of all of this going on right now. And if you go back to 1974 when Kissinger made a deal with Saudi Arabia and the petrodollar essentially being the standard, is that every country is using U.S. dollars to buy oil. It's no secret that BRICS and China have, for a while now been trying to combat that, to try to tank the U.S. dollar, get rid of it as a global currency. And I think that the Trump administration has identified that as, with Venezuela and Iran being such key integral components, especially Iran. You've got $400 billion investment into their energy market to try to combat the U.S. dollar. And if you look at the entanglements, in the last 30 years that the United States has taken part in, you've got, in 2000, Saddam was talking about selling oil in euros instead of the dollar. We invade Iraq. 2009, Gaddafi, proposes a gold-backed currency. 2011, we basically take him out, and that's under Obama. 25, Maduro is trying to sell oil in Chinese currency. Iran trying to do the same thing, and you see all these dominoes kind of falling into place. So, I think the broader play here is really combating China as being our number one global competition, militarily, economically, influence globally, et cetera. Is that you have this kind of butting of heads, I think, going on, and I think that, again, looking at it purely from a strategic standpoint, if you separate the justification side, should we be doing this? Is it legal? Is it moral, et cetera? I'm not minimizing that, but set that aside for a second and look at it purely from a strategy standpoint, is that China increasingly over the last couple decades, is eclipsing us in some ways and has become our biggest threat by far more than any other country, and I don't think it's even close. Because so many of the things that we rely on are made in China, including a lot of military equipment or components to military equipment, an outright war with China, I don't think would, one, it's not something anybody wants, I think either side, and two, I think we underestimate their ability to choke off not just materials within the military, but goods here in the United States, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, some of our food supply, et cetera. So there's so much at risk, and a full-blown war with China would be catastrophic, I think, for the entire planet. So what I think is taking place, and strategically what makes way more sense, is actually what is transpiring, and that supports what's going on, in my opinion, more than anything that I've heard, whether it's nukes or narco-terrorism or state-sponsored terrorists, globally, et cetera, with Iran. The amount of money and investment that China has put into energy and crushing the dollar and not having it be the global reserve currency has been significant. And what better way to collapse that house of cards for them than to now have Venezuela and Iran be non-Chinese favored administrations. There's not a single shot fired as it relates to China, because that's a totally different war scenario than Venezuela or Iran. So to me, that's what makes the most sense. It's what's the most logical in terms of administration not being transparent, with something like that. Can certainly understand not wanting to show all of your cards, but I think there's a way to communicate that if you look at it from kind of a more vague and broad economic standpoint of just saying that, hey, energy is important, whether you wish there were solar panels and windmills all over the planet instead of using oil. The reality is that the world works off of it, and the amount of investment and intent that China has put into global markets oil-wise, has stacked the deck in their favor and against us. So I think that's the biggest part of it. I know that I believe that it's all tied in, and I think that, when you look at China, bolstering their submarines, even helping Iran combat us, et cetera, it's nothing that we haven't or wouldn't do in a similar position. And frankly, you can't really blame them given the amount of money that we've wiped off the table in terms of investment that they've put in. So that's my take on them sending submarines to support Iran, and I think it's all connected to that bigger picture philosophy.
Nothing hits home like home cooking. And honestly, as someone who spent years eating whatever was in front of me whenever I could get it, sitting down to a real meal at home means something to me now. HelloFresh has made that easier than I expected. They sent me meals to try, and the thing that got me was just how simple it actually is. Everything shows up at your door, pre-portioned, ready to go. No running to the store, no wasted ingredients, no figuring out what's for dinner after a long day. You've got over 100 recipes to choose from every single week, including more than 35 high-protein options, Mediterranean meals, and even GLP-1 friendly choices if that's relevant to you. The ingredients are legit too. Sustainably sourced seafood, antibiotic and hormone-free chicken, seasonal produce, and they've even added grass-fed ribeye steaks. This isn't sad weeknight food. This is food worth sitting down for. If you've been trying to eat better and cook more at home this year, HelloFresh makes it easy to actually follow through on that. Go to HelloFresh.com/MikeDrop10FM to get 10 free meals plus a free Zwilling knife on your third box. That's HelloFresh.com/MikeDrop10FM. The offer is valid only while supplies last. Free meals applied as discount on your first box, and new subscribers only, and it varies by plan.
Video 6 and 7 is Russia aiding Iran with intel.
Sources tell CNN that Russia is aiding Iran's war effort by providing intel on U.S. military targets. When President Trump was asked about this, here's how he reacted.
It sounds like the Russians are helping Iran target and attack Americans now.
That's an easy problem compared to what we're doing here. I mean, but can I be honest? I have a lot of respect for you. You've always been very nice to me. What a stupid question that is to be asking at this time. We're talking about something else.
Well, first off, it's not a stupid question. And I think, responding that way is so below the office of the presidency. And I think that is a big part of why a lot of people dislike Trump, is reacting that way. Now, I understand his point in that, the context of where that question was being asked was a roundtable on how to sort through the NIL money within college sports, which I think is kind of a strange thing to be focused on, given everything that's going on. I understand that it's important. Does the president need to sit in on something like that? I don't think so. So while maybe asking that question in the context of that roundtable, isn't the best time to ask that, I think it proves a broader point, is that while the NIL stuff, if it's crumbling institutions to the point where it's going to negatively impact the infrastructure of our college institution, then by all means address it. But I think that's nowhere near the president's level or in his wheelhouse, rather, to be getting involved with. And something like this is far more applicable to be talking about. I also just don't like the way that he handles it. Even if you wanted to get your point across, saying something like, hey, great question, but let's stick to the topic at hand. Ask me that at the press briefing afterwards because I want to stay on topic. Like, to me, that's how an adult, and especially the office of the presidency, should handle things like that. I think name calling and saying people are stupid and what have you trickles down into every other form of government, and even in people's households. When they see, the highest office in our country conducting himself like that, I just think it's a terrible look. And I think it sets the wrong tone, sets the wrong example. And I think it's why you see Congress acting like children most of the time, arguing with each other. And again, trickling down into society, where you see people acting super childish and treating each other like they're in recess during fifth grade. So I would like to see, a little more decorum in handling yourself, more like a grown-ass man than what's being displayed there.
All right, look, when you spend years running on 4 hours of sleep in the teams, you think you can power through anything. And for a long time, I did. But I'll tell you, bad sleep catches up with you, and fast. Recovery, focus, mood, it all takes a hit. HELIX sent me one of their mattresses to try out and give my honest opinion, and I'm not going to lie, I was a little skeptical. But this thing has genuinely changed how I sleep. No more waking up with a stiff back. No more night sweats throwing me off. I'm actually getting deep, quality rest. And if you track your sleep at all, you'll notice the difference. HELIX is the most awarded mattress brand out there. It's tested and reviewed by Forbes, Wired, you name it. They've got a sleep quiz on their site that matches you to the right mattress based on how you actually sleep. There's free shipping, a 120-night trial, and a lifetime warranty. That's zero risk. Spring is the perfect time to upgrade your sleep setup. Go to helixsleep.com/MikeDrop for 27% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/MikeDrop, and make sure that you enter MikeDrop after checkout so they know that we sent you.
Last video is a professional predicts that Trump will fail in Iran.
For people who aren't familiar with your work, I wanted to show folks that back in 2024, you made 3 big predictions. 1, that Trump would win. 2, that he would start a war with Iran. And 3, that the U.S. would lose that war. So obviously that last one is the only one that has not yet come to fruition. Is quite a stunning prediction. Do you stand by it? And what have you seen so far that leads you to sort of stand firm in that conclusion?
So given my analysis of how the war is progressing, I think that Iran has many more advantages over the United States. The reality is that right now, it's a war of attrition between the United States and Iran. And the Iranians have been preparing 20 years for this conflict. In their eschatology, in their religion, this is a war against the great Satan. They've had many practice runs. Last June was a 12-day war when the Iranians were able to examine and analyze the strike capacities of both the Israelis and the Americans. And they've had a lot of time, 8 months, to prepare fully for this new attack. But right now, the Iranians are actually threatening the very existence of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. And why this is important is that the Gulf states are really the linchpin of the American economy. So what they do is they sell petrodollars, and then they recycle the petrodollars back into the American economy through the investments in the stock market. And right now, we know that the entire American economy is propped up by AI investments in data centers. And a lot of that comes from the Gulf states. So if the Gulf states are no longer able to sell oil, and they're no longer able to finance AI, this AI bubble in the United States, then this AI bubble will burst, and with it will burst as well the entire American economy, which is really a financial Ponzi scheme.
Right.
So that's a dire situation that the Americans are facing right now.
We also wanted to talk to you about munitions. We can put this next one up here on the screen. The United States is racing to accomplish Iran mission before munitions run out. This is specifically around interceptor math. There's a famous video just from yesterday in Israel, which shows a single Iranian ballistic missile, which is being targeted by some 11 different interceptors, all of which miss. Most of those come from the United States, not to mention all of the different bases, the GCC countries that you just talked about, and the asymmetry of the cost. It's $1 million for a missile, tens of millions per interceptor in some of these cases. With these munitions running out, how does that change the global picture? So you're in China, obviously, much of the stocks in Asia of the United States are likely to have to be cannibalized if this were to go on. How is that going to affect the global picture here?
Right. So my first point is that the United States military is not designed to fight a 21st century war. Remember, the military-industrial complex came to being after World War II, and it was designed to fight the Cold War. And the Cold War was really about muscle flexing, about who was able to send people up into space, who was the first to get the person on the moon, who had the more complex missile systems. And so the entire American military strategy revolves around very sophisticated technology that costs a lot of money to build. And that's what the American air defense system is basically. And that's why we're seeing this asymmetry, as you point out, in this war, where you have these $1 million missiles trying to take out these $50,000 drones. And it's not sustainable in the long term. And this is really a reordering of not just the global economy, because this signals the collapse of the petrodollar, and with it, the entire U.S. dollar-based reserve currency system, but also the global hegemony of the United States. We're moving towards a multipolar world.
Obviously, that's a long video, and there's kind of a lot going on. I think, a number of the points that the professor brings up a number of them are worth bringing up, and I think are fair questions, but there does seem to be a bit of a bias, almost anti-Trump or anti-West bias to a certain extent. Let's be honest, we all have biases, myself included. But I think the broader scope here is that, at least what I gather from his take in the video is that the air quotes losing in Iran equates to the collapse of the economy by way of the petrodollar being crushed in the Middle East, and all of those GCC countries essentially abandoning the United States because it's not going well in Iran. I do believe that that's a short-sighted viewpoint. I don't think it's that simple. I also don't think it's that easy to discourage them, because they essentially have everything to lose by that taking place. The other aspect that he didn't mention at all, which I think is a huge underestimation, is the Iranian people. You're talking about 90 million people who, yes, there are, a number of supporters of the old regime within the country, within the military, et cetera, but there are millions and millions who are not. And there's a vested interest, like he did mention, in the surrounding countries, and especially when you see missile attacks going into Saudi, going into UAE. I don't think Iran is doing itself any favors with that. It's doing the exact opposite. You're dragging them in, and you're also, I believe, creating a sympathetic response from the entire world, to get involved or to be more okay with the United States doing what they're doing and combating Iran because of what they're doing. So I would also say that, looking at what they've done thus far, and granted it's still, a week and change into it, there doesn't seem to have been a very significant impact. I know the math doesn't add up when you're looking at what it costs us to shoot down or intercept a lot of these cheaper kamikaze drones, et cetera, and that, one of the points he made is that that's not sustainable. Agreed. It's not sustainable indefinitely, but I also, from seeing the degradation of the regime's ability to strike the United States and its allies in the region over the course of 10 days or so, it's not sustainable for them to be able to be bombarded the way they are. And I think it's more of a waiting game of being able to eliminate their ability to do it on a scale with which is significant enough to have the impacts that he's talking about. I think when you couple that with more solidarity and intensity from the neighboring countries that I don't think he's taking into account, and the one thing that he didn't mention at all, which is the actual population of Iran, that I do think is going to play a significant role. I agree in that ground troops invading into Iran is a mistake. I think whether it's Kurdish forces nearby in conjunction with kind of a militia style ground force that is against the regime and wants to take control or combat it, et cetera, is the far more reasonable, economical, and likely outcome than a full-blown collapse in what he would consider losing. I don't think it's just about the United States having a huge ding or even a collapse of the economy in the way that he's talking about. I don't see that happening. It's not to say that it's not a concern. Again, I think all those points that he brought up are worth bringing up. I just think that they're a little incomplete, and there's a few things that he missed. One thing that I haven't touched on yet in this entire episode that he did bring up that I do agree with and think is worth mentioning is the Epstein distraction. The fact that all this has taken place, Venezuela, Iran, now talking about Cuba, college NIL stuff, and yet there still hasn't been a single person arrested in relation to the Epstein files, I think is total bullshit. Whether or not that's the driving force in conjunction with Israel being the entire and only or sole reason that we went into Iran the way that we have, I don't think that it's the only reason. Do I think it's a factor? It probably is, unfortunately. And it disgusts me that that's the case. To say that that's the only reason, I think, is equally short-sighted as saying that it's no reason, in that there are a lot of other factors, which I've already mentioned, and I won't beat that dead horse. But there are a number of reasons, and I think we're seeing them kind of play out as we go. But, to say that we're going to fail in Iran, given his definition of what failing looks like, I respectfully disagree. Obviously, he was right in saying Trump would get elected and that we would go into Iran in some capacity. But to say that we're going to fail in the context with which he's saying we're going to fail, not saying it's impossible. From my perspective, it's not likely, though, for all those reasons that I mentioned. So time will tell, and we will see what happens. But I do think the resolve of the neighboring countries and the population of Iran is stronger than he's accounting for. And I also think that the success that the United States and Israel has had air campaign-wise, to be able to mitigate the threat of, wiping out water plants and food sources and things in the neighboring countries. I don't see that capability being a realistic threat based on what we've seen so far. Does the chance exist that Iran is holding back? I suppose. It does not seem likely, though, given how bad they've been bombarded, how many top leaders have been killed, and how many of their offensive resources have been taken out. It would be hard for me to imagine that strategy-wise that would be their actual intent is to wait and try to kind of wait out this barrage of the air campaign and then start attacking when we somehow have our guard down or something to that effect. I can't imagine that that's the case. It's not impossible, but it just doesn't seem probable. So like I said, time will tell, and in terms of failing, I don't see it happening in the way that he's talking about. Now, if he was to say failing equates to not a regime change that's being replaced by somebody who is complementary to the United States and everything's kind of firing on all cylinders, and now they're a trading partner and a westernized ally, that's certainly possible. If he had said that is what constitutes failing, I think there'd be more of an argument, at least at this point, that's very possible. To predict that losing equates to a collapse of the petrodollar in the United States economy and financially not being able to continue, I think is far less likely. So that's my take on it. And now we're going to move into the Patreon questions. So again, if you want to submit Patreon questions for me to answer in this format on these mic drop solos, just go to my Patreon page, join, and submit them. We've been meeting on a regular basis with the Tier 3 Patreon members to discuss what's going on in the world. Great discussions, policy, geopolitical landscape, conflict in Iran, where our military stands, sneak peeks and insights to the guests, and some behind-the-scenes footage during and before and after some of our shows. I do that once a month for an hour. I meet with the Tier 3 Patreon members in a Zoom format, and we just kind of round table it. They submit questions, and I go back and forth there. And it's been really nice. It's a neat format to be able to interact with supporters of the show, and I enjoy doing it. But again, go to Patreon, the mic drop page to get in on those conversations. In terms of questions from there, we've got a video submitted by Shane. His question is, I heard this on the news last night. Military officer and the drone we had recovered, reverse engineered, modified slightly, and put into production for use against Iran. It's a bit frightening to me that we didn't have that shit figured out until we recovered one from the war in Ukraine. Opinions on thought leadership at the top. So there's a couple things. I mean, in terms of the thought leadership at the top, who's to say that this is the first time we've figured that out? It's the first time we've heard about it. I would be surprised if that hasn't been taking place to a certain extent already. And I also say that strategy and kind of tactic is nothing new. I mean, it's been going on for, frankly, millennia in terms of human beings combating each other. But even within the scope of the United States, there are instances in both world wars. Vietnam, I've had guests on that talked about finding ammunition that was, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese ammunition and unpacking it, putting explosives in the ammunition, repackaging it, and injecting it back into the supply side of the VC and the NVA, and then they load it up, shoot it, and they blow themselves up or disfigure themselves and take a bunch of fighters out. So this tactic as a war strategy is something that human beings have been doing since we've been fighting each other. So I don't know. I can't say that, yes, this is the first time, or that it took this long to figure that out. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I would assume that it's not, and it's just been a little more closely held. But I like to see it. I'm glad that they're doing it. And what better way to kind of repurpose and stick it back to your enemy than doing something like that. So I think it's great. All right, this is from Brian. Thoughts on all the different reasons we've launched this attack that have come from the administration. It seems they've contradicted themselves, reversed language, and have given multiple reasons that don't seem to make any sense. The campaign ran on staying out of conflict, and this is the 9th international conflict in 13 months. The campaign also ran on America First and keeping our money here and taking care of our own. Why can't we keep the money here for veterans and other domestic uses? I agree with you 100%, with one caveat, and I'm not even saying that it's necessarily a disagreement. It's something to think about, which I've talked about already in this episode, but I'll kind of summarize here in a second. You know, I've talked about this when I had Dan Crenshaw on. I've had other guests on that have political affiliations or posts, if you will. And, you know, that kind of fine line or walking the tightrope of what's good for us here in the United States, how it plays out overseas, what the big picture is, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very complex things. And I'm not saying that any of your question is wrong or your kind of point, because again, I agree with it. I think there should be way more investment put here in the United States, not just with veterans and veteran care, because I happen to be one. That is important, but so is our education system. So are all of the public utilities, roads, nuke technology for the energy sector. I mean, there are a plethora of things that we could be investing the money that we spend either combating other countries or supporting other countries that would be far better used here in the United States. Now, as it relates to, I think Dan Crenshaw mentioned, or I've heard it kind of mentioned this way, is we can walk and chew gum at the same time, which I hate that excuse of saying like, well, we can do both. There's an element of if things aren't changing significantly enough to notice here in the United States, then you're not walking and chewing gum at the same time. You're low crawling and chewing gum at the same time, because there's a huge disparity between what we're doing overseas. If you look at the impacts that we have globally and in the different things we get involved with, you see the return on the investment, what seems like quite a bit quicker. There's also a lot more money that's appropriated for those things in the blink of an eye, whereas for things here domestically, it seems to red tape itself to death and take years to actually fund. I think that's a huge mistake. It's a disparity that should be inexcusable, and there's no reason for it to be that way. Where I understand some of the things that we do overseas is kind of what I was talking about earlier, which is the big picture of our global economy, industry, manufacturing here, the petrodollar, the energy parallels and congruencies between all of the other enormous oil producers, Iran and Venezuela being two of the largest. To me, if anything, Venezuela and Iran seems more justifiable than Ukraine, than the Israel-Lebanon and Hamas situation. You could easily argue Iraq and most of Afghanistan is far less or far lower, rather, on the totem pole than trying to make sure that the U.S. dollar is dominant and that we have a safe and secure method for securing oil pipelines from all over the world. Because, again, everything in this country is shipped. Everything. So if the cost of oil is $400 a barrel, the cost of every single thing is going to be way higher, because everything moves from one place to another on a truck, almost inherently or ultimately. So I do understand that there are justifications for doing certain things and actions overseas, even while we're trying to accomplish an agenda at home of putting America first. I do think that there are some things that are justifiable. I don't think that there are anywhere near as many things that are justifiable as actually are taking place. The tough part, I think, for me and for most of us who don't have access to, number one, TSSCI intelligence to know exactly what's going on, and more importantly, just behind closed doors within the halls of our government, to kind of know really what's going on behind the scenes, what these conversations are are taking place between our government and other governments, our leaders and other leaders, et cetera. And it just feels like we're kind of in the dark. And I think for most people, what's tangible, what you can wrap your arms around and what you can understand is what's right in front of you, which is how much your electric bill costs, how much a gallon of gas costs, how much a dozen eggs costs, all of those normal things that get thrown around in the media as these, they would call kitchen table issues. That is the reality. The safety of America is hard to worry about when everything or a lot of these things are taking place overseas. Yes, there's crime on the streets, but there always has been, there always will be. It's hard to understand the justification of spending hundreds of billions of dollars between Israel, Ukraine, Venezuela, Iran, and all of the other pet projects that you've seen uncovered by some of the DOJ investigations and cuts, et cetera. So I hear you 100%. I do think there should be a much higher level of prioritization on homeland issues. I do think some of the things that take place overseas do make sense when it directly impacts our standard of living, our security, and our way of life here in the United States. I just don't think that a lot of them actually contribute to that. So great question, valid concern, and I agree with most of it. Another one of your questions from Brian Crenshaw says that Americans wouldn't understand the laws that come out of Congress, yet the Constitution has 4,543 words and the Bill of Rights has 462. The big beautiful bill was approximately 150,000 words for a single bill. Is there a way this could be simplified or handled better, both for citizens to understand and for things to be voted on or approved at a congressional level? I would hope so. That is one of the things that I asked Crenshaw when he sat here is, why is everything so complicated? And his response was, well, these are complex issues. And some of them are. I think a lot of them aren't. And I think, some of life's most complex problems actually have the simplest solutions. I think it's a bit of a cop-out to say that you wouldn't understand, and just that dismissive kind of political Heisman of telling people that it's above their pay grade and you just don't understand. And, to me, that's such a chicken shit response to, and I see a lot of politicians doing it. I'm not, picking on Dan specifically, or just in this case. I've seen, both sides of the aisle do it. I've seen politicians from the most junior all the way up to the president, and everything in between do it. I think it's a slap in the face to America to assume that people are too dumb to figure it out, or that it's so complex that they can't explain it. And it's like, well, if it's that complicated, then you need to simplify it in a way that everybody can understand it. Ultimately, we need to do a better job of two things. And by we, I mean the collective mean average of the United States voter, which is educate ourselves on what's really going on, understand the complexities of the problems where they are complex, and understand the simplicity of the problems when they are that simple, and be able to articulate them in a way that if there are town hall meetings or Q&As with politicians, is that you can ask that and you can push back on them. No different than sitting here in an interview and doing that same thing, is that you have to have enough understanding and knowledge and educate yourself enough to be able to grill politicians and not accept the answer of it's too complicated, you wouldn't understand. The second thing is voting. Crenshaw just lost his election. There's plenty of other instances of where voting should serve as whatever term limit the people want to put in place. I understand, and I'm not against term limits, that's for sure. I think there's validity to asking for a certain amount of time. I don't know what that amount of time is, whether it's 2 terms, 5 terms, 1 term. I don't know what the right answer is. I do think there should be a limit, no matter how good somebody is, no matter how much people want to keep somebody in office. There comes a point where I do think it makes sense to say, okay, it's time for somebody else. Having said that, there is power in the ability to say, you're doing a shit job, we're going to find somebody else. There's a lot of skepticism as it relates to the voting practices and procedures here in the United States, and questioning its validity, the sanctity of whether or not it's it's actually accurate and truthful and free and fair. I will say again, you see, a lot of instances of unexpected losses or wins on both sides of the aisle that at least gives me enough hope to say, focus on it, galvanize, mobilize, and get involved. And again, try to educate yourself and your surrounding communities and get out the vote and put the right people in office that do have our best interest in mind, A, and B, accurately represent the population. That's what we have control over, those two things. To not maximize our potential in both of those ways and in each individual person, we have nobody to blame but ourselves. So that's my take on how to accomplish that. Next question from you, Brian, is we're going to have to be involved in the process. Who is going to lead Iran? How would we do that? Going back to my point on Venezuela is I think there's a fine line. I don't think it's our job to pick. That's not our responsibility. And I don't think that even given the circumstances of what's taking place, we're not entitled to that decision-making process. Like I said with Venezuela, I think it behooves us and is smart and necessary to endorse people, to encourage, to try to even incentivize the Iranian population to both help rise up and take back control of their country in a more, viable way for them to be able to dictate who runs their country. I'm not even going to say necessarily democratic. It's up to them to pick. But they have to get some skin in the game and make that happen. And then I do think it's in our best interest to encourage, incentivize, and endorse people. But I think that's where we have to leave it. To get so far involved, kind of what you saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we're propping people up and essentially putting them in charge, I think is a mistake. And I think both of those countries, if you look back at the scope of our involvement in both of them, it validates that concern and highlights the fact that you can't have a complete propped up puppet of the United States running a country effectively. So I think that's where we need to draw the line. Last question from you is, do you think we're going to have to put troops on the ground? God, I hope not. I don't think so, and I hope not. To me, continuing to do what we're doing, lots of on-the-ground human-type intel and collaboration in that way, coupled with the Iranian people. I mean, that's really the question mark here that I think is going to dictate the success or failure of Iran moving forward into the future, is how big of a role the population plays in essentially taking its country back, and it's up to them. I think we should help them, but not with boots on the ground. I think that that's a mistake, and one that we don't need to learn that lesson the hard way again for the third time in 20, 30 years. So hopefully not. This one's submitted by Chad. I've listened to Sarah Adams on Sean's podcast multiple times talking about the Homeland plot and how Al-Qaeda claims there are over 1,000 terrorists, among other groups, here on our soil planning an attack that will be much larger and much more devastating than 9/11. What are your thoughts on an attack being planned and carried out here in America? If so, how do the recent events with Iran affect a potential take on us here at home? The short answer is I don't know. I've heard similar sentiments and segments from her and other folks within, I would say, that kind of shared community voicing similar concerns. The tough part for me to be able to say, yeah, that makes sense and I agree versus not, is two things. Is one, the intelligence on it, it's hard to know what's credible or not at this point between AI and propaganda and state-sponsored other countries kind of weaving themselves into our social media and mainstream media entities. And so it's hard to know what's viable, real actionable intelligence versus not. I mean, really all you can go off of is what has happened, what plots have been foiled by, federal law enforcement, and kind of where we're at in terms of taking a pulse of the security threat right this second. There is something to be said for being concerned. I'd rather be concerned and do our best to prepare than to be caught completely off guard with our pants down by dismissing it. I think that there's also a healthy, happy medium of preparing to the best of your ability, but not letting it control your life and being consumed with worry that, the next time you walk into a supermarket, you're going to get blown up by a suicide bomber. I think you have to find that happy medium of, focusing on yourself, being competent, being a contributing member of society, educating yourself, voting properly, voting educated, and kind of within your own home and neighborhood and community, being smart about security resources and prioritizing the safety of those around you. There's also something to be said for the long game. If there's one thing we've learned from whether it's Al-Qaeda or a lot of kind of the insurgent or terrorist groups that we've been combating with over the last, better part of 40 years, is that they're incredibly patient. Look at the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They essentially waited us out for 20 years. Now here it's obviously a little bit different dynamic in that we're here and they can't really wait us out on our own home turf to a certain extent. I do think that there is an element of, if the threat was as significant as I've seen it played out or talked about in some media circles, that we would have seen more of it by now. I do think that that's the case. Doesn't mean that there's not a threat or that it's not even as significant as I've seen, whether it's Miss Adams or others talk about it. It could be. Again, I think you do the best you can with what you have. Prepare yourself to the best of your ability and focus on educating yourself on what the problems are and also looking at the big picture voting standpoint of what we're doing, who we're putting in office, and how they're conducting themselves on the world stage in terms of our involvement overseas. Those are all important things. And I don't think it's any one single thing. I think it's, it's like an onion. There are layers, and you do the best you can with as many of them as you can. So that's my take. Last question is by Claire. Out of the 90 million Iranian citizens, what percentage is IRGC and police force do you think will help arm its citizens and overthrow these forces? If so, how? Or do you think we'll predominantly rely on a complete surrender? So to your first part, out of the 90 million Iranian citizens, so the IRGC is not the entire military. It's a portion of it. The figures I've seen is 125 to 190,000 or so, which is a pretty significant number. You have a few 100,000 other, in terms of population, other Iranian citizens that make up the rest of the military. The Quds force is, I think, 5 to 15,000, and you've got some special police and other forces that make up, some smaller numbers in that same total number. So if I had to put kind of a rough number on the entirety of what would be worth worrying about, it's more the IRGC, probably 250,000. I think that 250,000 that make up the rest of the military is far less of a significant threat. I think it's probably similar to Iraq, where it's a paycheck, it's not a lifestyle, a career, an ideology. It's what they're doing, and aren't going to be hell bent on martyrdom in terms of fighting the United States. But there is a significant number, probably a couple 100,000, that would fall into that category. Now, when you look at the rest of the population, that 90 million, obviously not all 90 million are fighting age males or females, between the ages of, say, 18 and 40, but there's tens of millions that fall into that category. And so again, I think it ultimately is going to rely on whether or not they find a way to rise up and combat it. And it would be probably a pretty bloody civil war, one where I don't think we should have boots on the ground. Whether or not we should equip and arm them, I'm not crazy about either. We've seen that backfire on us in Iraq when ISIS came in and took everything. Saw it in Afghanistan, where we bailed and left them with billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of not just arms, but tanks and armored personnel carriers and aircraft and all sorts of things. So I'm not a big fan of supplying arms because, one, you never know who they're actually going to, and two, they can decide to give them to the other side or become the other side in the drop of a hat, or depending on what the dynamic is. So I do think, again, if you set aside this was the right thing or the wrong thing to do aside for a second and just look at it from a strategic standpoint, I do think the way that we're going about it is probably the smart play for now. A lot of this, or some of it at least, is going to remain to be seen based on how things play out. I think crippling infrastructure and disabling large-scale ability for Iran to continue to crush its own citizens is our best bet for enabling the population to rise up and take back control of their country. It's not going to be easy. It's probably going to be akin to what the Civil War was here in the United States, I would ascertain. Maybe not, but I wouldn't be surprised if it took several years and you had, hundreds of thousands of deaths from it. There are enough people who want Iran to stay the way that it is to where I don't think you're probably going to see a large-scale full surrender. I don't think that that's in the cards. I'll be surprised if that happens. Not saying it's impossible, but I don't think that it's probable. So I think the most likely scenario is us continuing to do what we're doing for weeks or even months, and with whether it's intelligence or augments from surrounding areas, helping the local population or the population of Iran to ultimately take back control of its country and government, I think is the best foot forward and the most ideal scenario. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, and I think we'll see how it goes, and a lot of these questions will be answered over the next few weeks and months. So that's it for the Patreon questions and the reaction videos. I hope you guys enjoyed this solo mic drop. We're going to be doing these more regularly again to hit current events and answer some of the questions from a lot of the patrons, so that we're a little more relevant in terms of what's happening and the pulse of the country. Because I've been doing this for 8 years. I've had a lot of amazing guests on here. A lot of the conversations that I've had are incredibly relevant. Some of them are timeless and certainly applicable to anything that happens, currently. But I care about the state of this country. I want to help be a platform to help inform, ask the right questions, be as unbiased as possible. I'm not naive to the fact that I do have biases. I try to bring things and look at things as objectively as possible. The biggest thing is that I want relevancy in terms of what's going on, and giving people the right questions to ask, the right things to think about, and for all of us to take a more vested interest in the state of our country and be better equipped to keep it between the lines and ultimately get us to where I think we all want the country to be, which is what I think any of us would consider is on the right track. So hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, you can choke yourself, and we'll see you guys on the next one.